My name is Trenton Wheeler. I am a local musician, songwriter, music producer, and indigenous grass dancer. And it's my honor to start today with a land acknowledgement. Tennessee. You have only to look at a map of Tennessee to see the lasting influence of Native American peoples in our state. Read the place names aloud and listen to the echoes of the old tongue in Etowah, Chattanooga, Chickamauga, Tullahoma. Speak the name Tennessee and you've uttered a tribute to the Cherokee's musical word for where the river bends. Those who came to this so-called New World were met by people native to the land and lived and survived because of the natives' generosity and extensive knowledge of these regions. So today we acknowledge that Nashville, Tennessee occupies the traditional lands of the Yuchi and Muskogee peoples and the ancestral hunting lands of the Cherokee, Shawnee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. Today, these people no longer have a nation border in the state of Tennessee after the Indian Removal Act of 1830. With the Trail of Tears in 1838, the brutal and forced expulsion of indigenous peoples, the First Nations' rightful claim to the land called Tennessee was dramatically and forcibly dissolved. Ironically, it was an American president from this state, Andrew Jackson, a man whose life had been saved by the Cherokee in the War of 1812, who oversaw the First Nations' removal from this land. Even today, in spite of ancestral ties to the land and a significant population in this state, there are no Native American Indian reservations in Tennessee, and no state or federal services recognition of the First Nations people here. Despite this, Native artists, performers, and craftspeople are active and vibrant today as they've ever been, and their work tells the ongoing story of their heritage. Thank you so much for being here today and being a part of these important conversations, and thank you for allowing me to open this.
Trenton, thank you so much for that powerful acknowledgement. My name is Rayshawn Ray. I'm Vice President at the American Institutes for Research and the Executive Director of the AIR Equity Initiative. It is my pleasure to welcome you to AIR's Equity Initiative's inaugural Working at the Intersection Symposium, Pathways to Peace, Reimagining the Future of Public Safety for Youth and Community. So give it up for you all for being here. We really appreciate you all coming out. We get that people came from all across the country. We also get that even if you came from in Nashville, you might feel like you came from across the country dealing with Nashville traffic nowadays. So we really, really appreciate it. And we definitely want to lift up Meharry Medical College. Being here is deliberate. Being in this particular space, as well as in all the spaces that we've went to since we've been here, has been deliberate. To think about raising up assets that are oftentimes underutilized and underinvested in. So being in here in this space with the diversity in this room is important for all of us being here this evening. You saw a video a second ago about our bold agenda to use evidence to create equity and eradicate systemic barriers to upward mobility. Since 1946, the American Institutes for Research has been conducting groundbreaking research, providing technical assistance and strategic planning, and engaging in a lot of the work oftentimes that people don't see that uphold communities. For example, currently some of our researchers at AIR are currently conducting an evaluation of the Nashville Metro school system to look at some of the gaps and barriers and also some of the things that are going well here. And part of thinking about the AIR Equity Initiative is this an over $100 million investment to address systemic inequalities by race and place in local communities. And we are doing so much more. As I think about the hats that we wear, one thing I know about research, as we're coming together to talk about a conversation that rarely happens together, that being police violence, gun violence, and not just talking about those challenges and problems, but talking about how we get past them so that people can be peaceful on their way to and from work, on their way to and from school, to actually live in communities that they know that are safe. That not only when a crime is committed that they call the police and they show up on time, but also when someone is sick and when they're hurting and they need someone to show up, that the response times are similar in North Nashville as they are in other parts of the city. Part of thinking about police violence and gun violence, I'll lift up two statistics that are extremely, extremely important. The first one is that right here in the 37208 zip code, there was a study done a few years ago showing that the 37208 zip code had the highest incarceration rate of Black males in the country. In the country. Not Oakland, not Memphis, not other cities that we can name, right here in Nashville. Part of thinking about that, though, as we heard from Dr. Otis Johnson earlier, is that a lot of that policing and surveillance actually starts in schools when we talk about the school to prison pipeline. What's interesting about that particular statistic, though, is that it's not in a vacuum. And one thing, if you know anything about North Nashville, you know that if we go back decades, that this was a thriving, predominantly Black and middle class community. And a lot of that is coming back in a much more diverse way. But part of thinking about that is that a highway, I-40, that many of us ride on from the East Coast to the West Coast every single day, got put straight through North Nashville, similar to the way that it got put through Black neighborhoods in other cities across the country. And it completely decimated and destroyed this community. But this is what's interesting. Anchor institutions and assets like Meharry, like Tennessee State University, like Fisk University, like local organizations, like restaurants, continue to thrive and show what's happening here. The second stat is this. As much as we like to talk about gun violence and police violence as being highly correlated, research actually shows that they're much more decoupled than that. That in fact, that cities that have high rates of police killings are not the same cities that have high rates of crime. And cities that have high rates of crime are not the same cities that oftentimes have high levels of police violence. Instead, we have to tackle both of these problems simultaneously, but realize that the solutions to them might cause for pragmatic and different sort of circumstances as we move forward. So as I lift up these particular stats, you're going to hear from experts locally and nationally. I'm super excited that my friend Aloe Blacc is here, as he's been traveling around the world singing, and he is here with us this evening to moderate this extremely important event. And I'm happy to announce and introduce District 21 Council Member Brandon Taylor, who has just been an incredible partner to the AIR Equity Initiative as we work to make this particular event happen. He's extremely important to this particular district, to Nashville and the state. And after we hear from Council Member Taylor, we will hear from Virginia Spinks, who is one of our AIR Pipeline Partnership Program summer interns, who worked on an amazing project this summer, looking at the intersection of youth justice and education to contextualize this national conversation and bring it to bear for Nashville. Councilman Taylor.
Good evening. Several familiar faces here and several folks that I've had a chance to meet. I'm Councilman Brandon Taylor, and I want to welcome you to District 21, specifically North Nashville. I'll say this, I think Dr. Ray took a lot of my thunder because I was going to talk about I-40 as well. Right? But that shares with you exactly how important that decision, that policy decision was, right? And so I've only got a few minutes, so I'm not going to stay here long. So I prepared 3 points. I'm not a preacher, but I listened to them. But before we do that, I do want to take time to honor and remember the families and the souls in Israel right now, and want to be with you guys to lift those families up as they go through so much trauma and pain right now in their lives. Listen, Meharry is a highlight of this part of this city. How many people have ever been in this building or on this campus? Please raise your hand. Outstanding. Thank you. And those that have never been here, I want you to see the excellence that we have right here in North Nashville. A lot of times people in this community, in this district, don't get a chance to showcase who they are and who we are. And we have a chance tonight for you to see that. And so those 3 points, creating policy for all communities, back to I-40. Policy can work if done correctly. And that's where we come in as elected officials. We have to make policy that works for people. When we think about I-40 in the late 60s, that was policy driven. There was a group of advocates that went to the Supreme Court fighting I-40 and eventually was rejected, costing 1,400 residents to be displaced, along with 650 homes, 27 apartments, and countless Black-owned businesses, right? So when we think about policy, we have to think holistically, not necessarily in a vacuum. Secondly, access to create change. And that's exactly what we're doing here tonight. We want to make sure that we provide an opportunity for individual to have the access to create the change that they would like to see, and for you to be the change that you would like to see in this world. And then thirdly, connecting communities. We just talked about an interstate that disconnected the community, right? We're talking about a war that's disconnecting communities. Our goal, for me personally as an elected official, is to make sure that we connect communities and bring strong representation to those individuals. And we can do that by bringing each other together and working together. So again, I'd like to welcome you specifically to my neighborhood. I live right down the street in North Nashville, 37208. And I'm not incarcerated, and many people aren't either. So when we think about that, it's a little bit more detail. I'll ask you to go to, I'll see if Dr. Ray can send the report and you can read it yourself. It was one page, one line that said 37208 was the highest incarcerated community in the country. Also 37207 was on that list. And if you're from Nashville, you know that's East Nashville. So we want to think about these things. They're not all in a vacuum. We have to, again, continue to connect communities and build hope. So thank you guys. Welcome to Nashville. Welcome to North Nashville.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Virginia Spinks. I'm currently a graduate student at Georgia State University, earning my master's degree in public policy. This past summer, as Rayshawn mentioned, I served as an intern with the AIR Equity Initiative through the Pipeline Partnership Program, or P3. So P3 is a partnership between AIR and 5 universities: Georgia State University in Atlanta, Howard University in Washington, D.C., the University of Texas at San Antonio, the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and the University of Nairobi, Kenya. So today, I'm excited to share that P3 will be adding to its offerings of learning events and professional development opportunities a new 3-year fellowship program for advanced doctoral students at P3 universities here, whose research aims to address systemic inequalities. So this fellowship will expand pathways for students from a broad range of backgrounds to complete their doctoral degrees, and also help them obtain jobs in the research field of service, in service to AIR's mission to contribute to a better, more equitable world. As an intern this past summer, I had the opportunity to work on Equity Initiative's Educational Equity Program area, which aims to improve educational experiences and outcomes for students affected by the consequences of segregation by race and place. So through my work in this area, combined with some schoolwork I did, I looked at some school discipline data to help ground the conversation here in Nashville using the Department of Education Civil Rights data collection. We're looking at this school discipline system and the education system because it's important to understand the linkages between these systems and how they interact with one another. I want to preface by saying that this is not meant to wholly describe youth experiences in Nashville. It's a very narrow way of looking at the problem. And ultimately, this information is yours because you are the experts in your communities. So it's yours to contextualize and interpret during the rest of the symposium this evening. So the U.S. Department of Education collects civil rights data every 2 years, and they've done this since the late 60s in civil rights legislation, and they disaggregate it by race, gender, and disability. This data, unfortunately, is 6 years old. We don't have newer data than that, so this is from the 2017-2018 school year. Some key takeaways. Black students in Nashville public schools are disciplined at rates that are extremely disproportionate to their enrollment. This is a problem not unique to Nashville. And there are research-backed ways to address this. But we also want to be looking at how these systems interact. So those are my 2 main takeaways. So this is what that disproportionality looks like in Nashville. This means that even though Black students account for only 40% of overall enrollment, they account for 66% of overall disciplinary infractions. And we see that boys are disciplined overall more than girls. But this disproportionality is more acute for Black girls than Black boys in Nashville, meaning that there's a greater difference between the number of Black girls and the amount of times they're disciplined. Why does this matter? Why are we looking at school discipline? A lot of studies have demonstrated the long-lasting harmful effects of exclusionary discipline practices, especially for students of color. These impacts include increased interactions with the criminal legal system and later imprisonment, especially for Black boys, and school push-out effects for girls, especially Black girls, correlated with stifled opportunities for greater economic and academic achievement. Looking at specific types of school discipline, this is out-of-school suspensions, and we see here that in this school year 17-18, Black students are 106% more likely to be suspended out of school than white students. And that disproportionality is there for Native students, multiracial students, Hispanic students, and not AAPI students. And then when we look at expulsion, which is another kind of exclusionary school discipline, those disparities are even worse. We're focusing on Black students because those Black students are the primary group enrolled in this part of Nashville. But we see here that the disparities are really drastic for Native students as well. And so when we looked at on a school level, we also found that as the Black population of a school increased, so did the discipline rate. And I controlled for a number of factors of possible factors that might explain this, like the number of offenses occurring in a school, the enrollment size, the age of the students, and the neighborhood's average income level. And we didn't find a meaningful relationship between neighborhood income and school discipline, or any of these factors. So this means that the race really was the prevailing factor explaining school discipline rates at predominantly Black schools. So we'll zoom in on this relationship in this slide, which looks at where we are here in District 21 and the neighboring district, District 19. So we're in the Pearl Cone School Cluster, which all of these schools, many of these are magnet schools, but the zoned schools feed into Pearl Cone High School, which is here in District 21. And we can see here that that relationship that I was describing between the proportion of Black enrollment in the school and the discipline rate. So some of these magnet schools in District 19, they have a lower Black enrollment and a lower discipline rate as opposed to District 21. So that is how this is playing out at these schools in this neighborhood. We're looking at this cluster. This is really important. 77% of the students that Pearl Cone serves are certified to receive public assistance benefits. So this is the highest proportion of students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged in the entire Metro Nashville public school system. And so, like I said, we have this positive correlation between Black student enrollment and Black student discipline rates in these city council districts, and especially in the middle school and high schools. So if there's anything that I want you to take away from this, again, these problems are not endemic to Nashville. School discipline does have serious consequences for Black students, and we have research-informed alternatives to exclusionary disciplinary practices, like restorative justice approaches, positive behavioral intervention and supports, mental health supports, educator cultural competency trainings, and increasing teacher diversity in our schools. I hope that this data about what's happening provides a little bit of context for the discussion tonight about effective interventions to promote youth thriving and public safety. It's important that we consider local and national examples of the roles that different systems can play to foster peaceful communities. And I've looked a lot at this data, so if you have any questions for me about it, feel free to come up to me after, and I'd love to chat with you or answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Taylor, Rayshawn, and Virginia. My name is Just Paul Bhatia, and I serve as a program officer for the AIR Equity Initiative, leading our justice and public safety portfolio. As Virginia mentioned, we're all about going into the communities and looking deep at the data, and community is central to what we fund through the AIR Equity Initiative. That's why I'm proud to share that we're supporting 2 local nonprofits that are working to help young people meet their incredible potential. The AIR Equity Initiative will contribute $5,000 to Southern Word. Through the literacy and performing arts, Southern Word offers creative solutions to youth to build literacy and presentation skills, reconnect to their education and lives, and act as leaders in the improvement of their communities. They're committed to providing youth, especially in underserved communities, as well as many other opportunities as possible, and publicly present their voices. You'll hear from one of Southern Word's youth later this evening. We're also sponsoring college scholarships for deserving youth through a $5,000 donation to the Nearest Green Foundation. The Nearest Green Foundation is a nonprofit founded to honor a slave who is said to have been responsible for teaching a young Jack Daniel the fine art of making whiskey. The foundation furthers its mission through research, historical preservation, and a legacy scholarship program for direct descendants of Nathan Nearest Green. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator for this event, Grammy-nominated musician, philanthropist, and advocate, Aloe Blacc.
Thank you, Just Paul. Thank you, Rashawn, and thank you, Councilmember Taylor. I'm grateful to be here. I'm glad that I could be part of this important conversation. I'm committed to as much positive transformation that I can do and make as an artist in my music, through my philanthropy, through my activism, and also being here to foster the discussions that are important. We're going to start by hearing 5 experts and AIR Equity Initiative grantees who will offer diverse, evidence-based perspectives to advance public safety across the nation in response to the question, in your AIR Equity Initiative funded or other scholarly work, what are you learning about or doing to create pathways to peace for communities and youth? Our first speaker is retired police chief and founder and chief executive officer of the Institute for American Policing Reform, Nicholas Sensley. Nicholas?
Ladies and gentlemen, I used to be one of the most powerful public officials in America. I was an American police officer. Now, I want you to absorb that because you probably have not thought about an American police officer in that context. Let me help you work through that a bit. The American police officer is the only public official who has the ability, the immediate ability, to remove your freedom or to take your life. No other American public official has the ability to exercise that authority. Now, let me give you a brief story about how that sometimes plays out. I don't have to make up stories. I have so many, I'll share one of my own. I was on duty as a young sergeant. I pulled up into a crowd of people. I stopped my vehicle to see what was going on. And just as I stopped, a shooter emerged from the crowd, and he's shooting actively at people right before me. I get out of my vehicle. I draw my firearm, and I call out to him to draw his attention to me, to keep his unsuccessful effort at shooting others from being unsuccessful. And yet he continues. And I decide, in the midst of people going everywhere, the only way that I could stop this individual from killing someone is to shoot him. So as I came on point to take the shot, he stopped. He stopped, he lowered his weapon, he turned around, and he started running directly toward me with his weapon lowered and his head down. Now, I thought at the time that he had no idea that I was there, as he was running directly with his head down and his weapon lowered. So in the last effort, my weapon at the ready, I was positioned safely behind my firearm. I called out to him to stop or lose his life in very kind words. Sir, would you please drop your weapon so that I don't have to shoot you? He looked up, he dropped his weapon, put his arms out to his side, and immediately went face down to the ground. Took him into custody without a shot. Now, here's the part about how it played out. The next morning, the press wrote an article about how it was an heroic effort to take someone into custody without taking the shot. Back in the police department, I went through weeks and days of, what was it? Were you afraid to take the shot? Were you a coward? You should have just shot him. It was just another dirtbag that you could have taken off the street to remove us from the problem. I get to court, and the district attorney prosecuting the case says you should have shot the SOB. It would have made all of this a whole lot easier. So you see, that's when we have concerns about how that power, how that authority plays out. So what I need you to understand is that public safety does not belong to the police. Public safety belongs to you. And we have been negligent in maintaining our ownership of public safety. In all of the need for reform in government across America, I want to assure you that reform in American policing is the one opportunity for change that we can actually do. Well, you need to understand that there is no system of American policing. There are almost 17,000 local, county, and state police agencies, and I promise you, you have the ability to bring about necessary change. So at the Institute for American Policing Reform, we are in the process, in partnership with the American Institutes for Research, going to a 6-year discovery and research process to discover the most promising pathways to police reform through the community, through the people who own public safety, to find ways to bring into account this very powerful service. What I'm bringing before you today is not an indictment on American police officers. I believe with all my heart that 95% of the men and women that go into that service go in with the right intentionality. There's a culture of American policing that needs to be addressed because police are essential and so is reform. Thank you.
Now we will hear about why data is not enough from Ugochi Jones, Vice President of Data Science at Benchmark Analytics.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Ugochi Jones, and I work at Benchmark Analytics. And our goal at Benchmark is to enable law enforcement to have almost real-time insight and insight into how officers are interacting and impacting the community they serve. This is key to me, particularly for accountability and transformation, because I don't want to hear we weren't aware. So my team focuses on creating machine learning models to detect officers exhibiting problematic behaviors. We are also beginning to build analytics related to biased policing and also highlighting excellence in policing. But the biggest thing that I work on is generating buy-in among officers around data, and they're the ones who are collecting the data, and the analytics that we present them, and what they should do with that data, particularly as it relates to problematic officers. So this is just a diagram of kind of the relationships that I'm constantly thinking about when I think about the analytics we present to officers and how we have conversations with officers. I know we can have the best data, we can have the most accurate models, the most accurate analytics, but if there's no buy-in, no action or change will happen in terms of changing behaviors. So what are the barriers so for me to attack that problem, I need to understand what's the barriers to action. And the three key sentiments that we hear across agencies is that data is just meant to get officers in trouble. The second sentiment I hear is that, oh, researchers, you're just looking for problems. And because you're looking only for problems, you're gonna find it. That's what you guys are doing. And then the final thing that we're hearing from departments is that we give them data, but we don't tell them what to do with it and why. So at Benchmark Analytics, we try to create software that addresses some of their concerns and also make sure that this analytics is up in front. So we have our first system, which is our benchmark management system. And what it does is basically gives agencies one system to capture personnel and event data. And when I say event data, what I mean is how officers are interacting with the public. Right now, if we go into most agencies are still using paper and pencil and filing it in a cabinet. So do they really have is data really accessible to them? And if there are other agencies who are able to digitize their reports, it's often siloed. So there is one source system for use of force, another source system for arrest, another source system for accommodations. And on top of that, there are layers to get access to that data. So those supervisors who are supposed to manage those officers who are interacting with the public don't really have a full picture of their officers. So our first goal is getting it into their hand on demand as quickly as possible. Our second thing is that we have an intervention system. And I highlight intervention because it's not discipline. We don't want reactive, we actually want preventative. So let's use our analytics at the first sign of kind of issues coming up to prevent it and use coaching and mentorship to better support officers in changing their behaviors in relation to the public. And finally, we have a care system where we're looking to help officers assess and assign interventions and monitor those interventions and learn how data and their interventions are interacting to change officers' behaviors. So we're really trying to get officers invested in the data that they collect so that they can improve policing and their officers in the way they interact with the public. This is really quickly, another thing we have to do is create accessible analytics, right? So a lot of people don't like numbers. So how can we think about the ways of highlighting problem areas in a clear way that anybody feels comfortable interacting with? And we're iterative, right? So we'll start with stuff and we're constantly talking to our agencies to see how they interpret the data, what they'll act on that data, and what that means for future interventions. So this is kind of a summary of our approach, but in the end, my theory is that if we can empower officers to use vetted data and analytics to facilitate mentorship, we'll increase buy-in among officers, leading to behaviors and policy changes that shape and improve how policing is done in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochi. Now we will hear from Christy Lopez, professor from practice at Georgetown University Law Center, and she'll talk to us about the effects of police training on reducing harm.
Good evening, everyone. I am truly honored to be here. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share with all of you how AIR, their equity initiative support, is going to help the Center for Innovations in Community Safety, the center I helped direct at Georgetown Law, really help us transform policing and public safety. To understand why this is important, I think it's helpful to have some background. I started the Center for Innovations in Community Safety when I came to Georgetown Law from the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And while I was there for about 10 years overall, I had investigated police departments, I had sued police departments, I had tried to implement consent decrees in police departments. And I learned during those years all the ways in which policing we've already heard a lot of this tonight, in ways in which policing can be both overly intrusive, unnecessarily violent, at the same time that it is underprotective and not particularly effective in a lot of the communities that are most in need of police protection. But most importantly, what I came to realize during this time is that we're never going to be able to change this equation unless we entirely reconceptualize what our public safety systems look like and the role that the police play within that public safety system. And that's what I really aimed to do when I came to KICS. That's what we call our Center for Innovations in Community Safety. And so then that's what this project is about. And it's fair to ask yourself, what does an assessment, how is an assessment going to change policing, transform policing? And I think one way to think about that, or one way to understand that, one way I'm hoping to explain that to you tonight, is that is through the KICS mission. And at KICS, we use individual interventions and systems level change to try to transform policing and end over-reliance on policing. Well, what does that mean? It means that we work on parallel tracks. On the one track, we're trying to entirely change how policing happens so that it looks entirely different, so it's completely, utterly transformed. At the same time that we're trying to change policing, we're trying to shrink its scope, shrink the scope of policing so that we aren't so quick to turn to police to meet our community safety needs. And that's because until we end our over-reliance on policing, not only will we never have fully effective community safety, but we'll also never be able to end abusive policing. And so on the trying to shrink the role of police within our community safety system, we work on projects like alternative first response, like hospital-based violence intervention, things that take police out of the community safety equation. But within this smaller sphere, where we do need policing, we don't believe that any community needs to settle for abusive policing, even within that sphere. And so And we believe that you can have policing that is dramatically less violent and that doesn't cause such disproportionate harm to Black and Latino people, even as it is more effective at protecting communities. And along those lines, what we're trying to, one of the programs that is our flagship program is called Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement, or ABLE. This is a program that is a skills-based training program and cultural change program designed to actually teach officers how to effectively intervene and prevent another officer from committing misconduct or making mistakes. It's based on social psychology research done by Dr. Irvin Staub and many others over decades, trying to figure out why is it that some people intervene to prevent harm while others sit by passively and let harm occur. And we started this project, it was called EPIC, as part of a consent decree in New Orleans that I helped negotiate many years ago. And it seemed to be working there, but no one was really paying attention until George Floyd was murdered, and everyone saw officers standing around doing nothing when they could have intervened and prevent harm. And we knew then that it was time to take advantage, at least, of people's attention to this moment. And so we brought that program to Georgetown. We amped up the curriculum and the pedagogy and launched it nationally. And we have been using that theory of change that if you can train officers to intervene, you can help create a culture in which intervention is not only accepted but demanded by the culture, and change the way that policing happens and reduce policing harm. We've never said that ABLE itself is meant to directly reduce disparities in race disparities in harmful police conduct. We wonder whether it does, right? Because we know that Black and Latino people are disproportionately subjected to unnecessary police violence. And so if we are able to prevent that, then they should be disproportionately advantaged by that. But we do know that implicit bias training is meant to reduce race discrimination in policing. And oftentimes implicit bias training is offered as a way to reduce racial disparities in policing. But unfortunately, what the research shows is that it's really good at raising people's awareness about their automatic biases, but it's not very good at changing their behavior. So this project that AIR is funding is going to allow us to both to test whether if we provide people the ABLE training as well as the implicit bias training, might that enable people to actually act upon the awareness that they have and give them the skills to intervene and prevent that harm. I just want to end with my team because I'm up here talking, but these are the people who are going to do the work every day. And I wouldn't feel right being up here without letting you know that their skill and their commitment to this project already has been really amazing. And they're the reason this project is going to work. And we really appreciate AIR's support for helping us make this work happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. Next, we'll have an opportunity to hear from Paula Iwanide, a qualitative research methodologist and triage team at Center for Policing Equity. She'll discuss her work at the Center for Policing Equity.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Do me a favor and turn next to the person next to you and say, "It is good to see you here today."
It is good to see you here today.
And turn to your other neighbor and say, "You look really good today."
You do. I was inspired.
Because listening to a lot of researchers talk about all the stuff that they do, we got to shake it up a little bit. Just want to thank everyone here. Your presence here is so important. Want to thank AIR for inviting us. My name is Paula, and I work as a qualitative researcher. What that means is I try to really capture the voices of the people most impacted by our public safety systems, the testimonies, the stories, right? We have a lot of work at Center for Policing Equity on the statistics, all of which show that there is no city in the United States that doesn't have racial disparities where Black people are disproportionately impacted and negatively harmed. But my job there is to also hear the testimonies, not only about how do our people experiencing public safety response systems, policing systems, but what do they want to do about them? And our partnership with AIR is helping us to essentially evaluate the interventions that we are implementing in various cities and municipalities across the country to see if they actually work. We know a lot about the problem. We don't know actually a lot research-based about what the solutions are, right? So when I think about creating pathways for peace for our youth and for our communities, I think about a world where parents and caregivers, but particularly Black parents and caregivers, could send their children to school with the assurance that they will be loved, that they will be cared for, that they will be empowered by the education that they receive. I think about well-resourced neighborhoods with the kinds of assets that this college represents, right? I think about sending those people out without any worry that they will be harmed, an environment with no prospects for violence or especially police violence, right? But I also get very overwhelmed because we all know that we are living in a city, a world in which our investments in systems of racial violence and punishment far outnumber our investments in systems of care. And so if you want to know what is the Center for Policing Equity about, our work is essentially to expand our investment in systems of care and shrink our investments in systems of punishment. But I want to kind of put before you this key question: what do we mean by safety and for whom? Because as I talk to communities across the United States about that, we get very different answers, depending on who you ask and depending on whose testimonies you center in that work, right? And so at the Center for Policing Equity, we believe that those who are most impacted by the problems of policing and public safety are closest to the solutions. This is why in all of the work that we do, we center the voices of Black community members to drive the redesign of public safety systems, right? And I want to emphasize that Black folks are not in agreement about what this should look like. They are not a monolith. Their responses about what the solutions should look like can range from we want more policing to we want to abolish the police, and a lot of things in between, right? And so when we say, what does redesigning public safety actually mean? What does it look and feel like, right? I want to tell you a story about a Black father in the city of St. Louis, where we have been partnering with that city and the Department of Public Safety there for the last 3 years to really redesign their public safety system to mean more than policing, right? And this Black father tells a story, this is in an interview we did, tells a story about his son, who is experiencing significant mental health issues to such a degree that the family themselves feel threatened by his behavior. They go and get a restraining order, right, against their own son because they are feeling so threatened. And he continues to essentially violate the restraining order by showing up at the house. And so the father, feeling threatened, calls the police. Right? And so we asked him, what would you like police officers to do and say, when they arrive, right? And he says, to see everyone as human, not just a statistic. Now, mind you, he's relying on the police to respond to his son and to the restraining order, to enforce the restraining order, right? But he goes on to describe the fact that he did not feel confident that the police officers that responded could identify that his son was actually dealing with significant mental health issues. And not only that, at no point in their multiple times that they show up upon being called did he feel that, did they connect him to resources that essentially would assist his son or call an emergency response system, right? And so what does this mean? My time is up way too fast. Is that essentially what we have to really start thinking about together is how to center Black community voices and empower them to be at decision-making tables so that when we redesign public safety systems, we can also think about a mental health response. We can also think about a different kind of traffic safety response system. We can also think about an restorative justice practices in a school system, right? Not to expect that one type of responders can respond to this wide array of issues that Black and Brown and all communities are actually grappling with today. And I ask and invite you to join us in that work, to join us in making sure that those communities are centered in those major decision-making processes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And finally, we'd like to hear from Candace Hester, Principal Researcher at the American Institutes for Research, and she'll talk about AIR's Advancing Justice Hub.
Thank you so much. I'm going to dive right in. More than a century following President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, President Johnson spoke these words: "Until justice is blind to color, until education is unaware of race, until opportunity is unconcerned with the color of men's skins, emancipation will be a proclamation, but not a fact." This is in 1972, where the first red line is. About a half century later, Elizabeth Hinton, Yale professor, wrote, "Arguably the most important question facing American society today is why, in the land of the free, 1 in 31 people is under some form of penal control." Hinton goes on to explain that it is U.S. policy, including Johnson's war on poverty, that fostered this unprecedented growth, which disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous populations. A 2022 publication by the National Academy of Sciences showed the magnitude of these disparities, with Black residents being between 4 and 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white residents, and Indigenous residents being between 2 and 3 times more likely. 21st century declines in incarceration rates have started to reverse alongside the uptick in gun violence. Community violence is now a leading cause of death among young people, and youth of color are most affected. At the same time, as we've just heard, and y'all all know all too well, our traditional responses to gun violence may merely deepen wounds of disconnection, particularly between police and community. This is why a lot of what you've heard about today are what we would call public health approaches that are alternative response mechanisms that are increasingly being called for. They leverage cross-system collaboration across systems of education, healthcare, neighborhood and the built environment, the social context, and economic stability. At AIR, our mission is to generate and use rigorous evidence that contributes to a better, more equitable world. We work across education, across international and community development, across healthcare, workforce, and injustice. To advance justice, we aim to address the root causes of harm and trauma and promote safety, dignity, and thriving. With the support of the Equity Initiative, we have a growing portfolio which reflects these commitments, and I'm gonna only have time to talk to you just about a few of them. First, I'm gonna talk to you about the Neighborhood Opportunity and Accountability Board, which is currently in practice in Oakland and Richmond, California. This board diverts impacted youth at the point of officer contact to community assets. The National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, NICJR, co-created NOAB, the Neighborhood Opportunity and Accountability Board, with community, and when youth are referred to NOAB, they receive individualized, community, and strength-based diversion services. As a part of NOAB community, elders devise the response using restorative circles to bring accountability and address unmet needs. Graduating participants have no further justice system contact. So this means that a young person who may have gotten caught up for shoplifting or for carjacking, instead of being put into probation or even detention, will be under the guidance of community elders. They'll receive mentoring, they'll receive counseling, they'll receive additional job training. They might be in family counseling. And once they are shown to have graduated those programs, 6 to 9 months later, they will have no further contact with the justice system for the referring incident. For more serious violent crimes, we're also supporting an evaluation of credible messaging, which has taken hold across the United States and is 30 plus cities. You can see a map here of just the cities that the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform provides technical assistance to. Credible messenger mentoring aims to cultivate supportive relationships between impacted community members, those are justice impacted, violence impacted community members, and violence exposed youth. In the NICJR model, credible messengers provide a range of supports. This is street outreach, this is mentorship and direct violence mediation, At the same time, NICJR provides technical assistance to police and community about how to leverage the kinds of relationships that will support this thriving. In addition, NICJR works as a collective of other technical assistance providers, where it is a so-called Coalition for Advancing Public Safety, to provide technical assistance supports for the community violence intervention ecosystem. In this work, they are working to specifically reduce gun violence and homicides and non-fatal shootings by 20% in 12 of the most highly impacted cities across 3 years. AIR, across all this work, provides research, evaluation, and technical assistance supports. Looks like all these bullet points here, so rigorous research, design, and analysis, measurement, and surveys. But really what's become quite central to our approach is participatory approaches, really honoring the full humanity of AIR and the communities in which we're serving. And the projects I just talked about looks like community advisory boards, where we pay community members to come and meet with our staff quarterly and advise us on everything from the research design to dissemination. And in addition, on the NOAB project, we actually pay young people to participate in evaluation activities, design their own research questions, come up with their own recommended solutions, which we will collaborate around dissemination for. Our society abounds with potential. For all people to realize that potential, serious and long-standing structural barriers must be addressed. Dismantling these barriers will require us to bring collaboration, to bring courage, to bring imagination, to redesign systems of public safety and justice and engender pathways for peace and thriving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Candace. I'd like to ask a question, and we have very brief time to answer it, but I hope that we can speak with consideration for the evening. And the question is, with recent patterns of abuse, lack of transparency and accountability by some frontline officers and command staff, what action steps would you suggest community organizations and individuals take? And just, as a brief comment from you, Mr. Sensley.
One of the things that we have to realize right off is that sheriffs, state police, et cetera, they have a much stronger accountability at the public than it appears that the public seems to know. When I was a chief of police, I deliberately kept my office close to the front counter so that I could hear the person coming in that's yelling at the people at the front counter that had problems. And so that I could step out there and that they could know that I was accountable to them, because I knew that I was. But that wasn't just me, it is a reality. And so when I said earlier that public safety belongs to you, that's sincere fact. You have the ability to really own how public safety is managed, because you need to be a part of it, and we need to stop surrendering our expectation that public safety is in the hands of policing only.
I would like to actually address the question to Paula as well, if you have any thoughts on.
Thank you. Yeah, before I did this, I really came to it as an organizer, as a community organizer. And one of the things that I would just encourage all y'all to really think about when we talk about those most impacted and having some kind of decision-making power in public safety systems is just understanding how municipalities work, right? There was so much confusion as a community member. How do they allocate budgets? How do you go to the public, the meetings and the committees, and where all of the kind of decision-making processes go and get made along the way? And because we didn't know how that worked as community members, many times we found ourselves constantly being behind the actual points, the decision-making points where we needed to be, right? So there's kind of two pieces that I think there's just a lot of community education that can be done. One is, how do budgets work? Because a lot of it is about, where do you allocate the resources, and are you at the right meeting and at the right committee to intervene on that accountability process, right? But the second piece is really understanding how powerful the voices of community members can be if you actually really organize to show up to make those interventions in the decision-making processes where public safety redesign is really at play. when we work with people across the country, for example, to stand up and implement alternative response systems, what we see is that there's these moments of fervor around police violence or a specific case, but that dies out over time. So who's going to sustain that effort over time? And do they understand enough about how all of this administrative, very complicated stuff works to be able to stay the course?
Great. Thank you so much. I would like you all to give a round of applause to our panelists. We have the honor of hearing from Youth Poet Laureate Lachlan Cook from the National Youth Poet Laureate.
A boat leaves us in its wake. We rock back and forth, some on kayaks, some on floats, some just swimming. We complain about how fast boats are allowed to go, how they disrupt our afternoons. I grumble to myself over the sound of the engine and think, how can they be so inconsiderate? Sometimes a boat comes into our little bay and I am afraid I cannot move out of the middle fast enough to avoid it. A boat hit at the 7-Eleven that wasn't even open yet. A boat hit at a music festival in Las Vegas. A boat hit in Nashville. We rock back and forth with the waves they send, but after, we forget how they disrupted our days. I don't want to forget about the boats this time. I don't want to pretend they were never there. I don't want to do boat drills. I don't want to shake at the sound of a fake revving engine outside of my classroom door. Some of us are lucky enough to move out of the way of a boat, but the driver keeps going no matter how much the swimmers keep begging him to stop. I'm scared a boat will hit my family. I'm scared a boat will hit my school, my grocery store, my movie theater, the home of a family I know, the home of a family I don't know, a nightclub, a music festival, a Walmart, a church, a synagogue, a McDonald's, a post office. I didn't know them personally. I didn't even know they existed, but our city lost 6 people. A boat hit them and left their families in our city in its wake. And who let this boat on the water? The National Boat Association. The boat lawmakers, those who issue boat permits, the boat makers, those in power who simply offer thoughts and prayers. Here's what we're getting from our elected officials. This is senseless violence that could not have been prevented. I must vote against boat safety laws. I need to donate to the National Boat Association. My last contribution wasn't publicized enough. The driver of the boat had severe mental illness. There's nothing we could do to prevent it. There's no way to stop someone like that from getting a boat. I'm a boat owner. I have at least 20 boats and I've never hit anyone. I have a 30-person yacht that I use by myself and I've never done anything like that. And these are the prayers your children are hearing. Dear God, please help those children find their way to the gates of heaven. That boating incident was so bad. There's nothing we could do to prevent it. Thank you. But their thoughts and prayers have never been enough. They will never be enough. I have friends who didn't come to school the day after because they were terrified. 3 students will never go back to school again. How many more of our children have to die before they do something, before you do something? Some people say I shouldn't be afraid of boats because boats don't kill people, people kill people. But life jackets don't work with bullet holes in them.
Thank you so much, Lachlan. Keep your round of applause for our next panel. Thank you so much. So we heard about approaches to advance public safety and justice from a national perspective. Now we will hear what this all means for the community here in Nashville. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. First, Daniel Singh, Executive Director, Metro Arts, Nashville Office of Arts and Culture. Christina Edmondson, Principal Consultant, Edmondson Consulting, and host of Truth's Table podcast. LaVale Allen, Executive Vice Chair, Department of Radiology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Jennifer Wade, Court Administrator, Davidson County Juvenile Court. Abraham Mion, Chief Justice of the Student Government Association at Fisk University. And Jill Fetchard, Executive Director, Metro Nashville Community Oversight. Now, to all panelists, again, we're having these lightning rounds of conversations. So I'm going to ask a question, and hopefully we can keep our statements brief to be considerate of the time for this evening. Today's symposium is focused on reimagining the future of public safety in Nashville and beyond. How would you describe the current state of youth and community well-being in Nashville? How has this impacted you or someone in your life? So I'll start with you, please.
Sure. So I think we're in a pivotal moment here in Nashville, and I think we have to look at what systems cause the problems we have. And I think we've been often talking about individual situations, and I'm really interested in what is creating the systemic effect. And yes, I have encountered violence in my life, but I, again, want to ask, how did I get access with a model minority myth and get pathways to education, be able to work, whereas someone same age as me has to deal with the anti-Black oppression and doesn't have those pathways. So that's kind of where I am right now, to kind of figure out how do we look at systemic issues and not get caught up in personal moments for myself or others.
So my work largely looks at the intersection between social change and faith. And one of the reasons why that's important is because people of faith in the United States have the potential to be significant change agents or significant hindrances to change in our society. And as I listened to Lachlan's really prophetic poem that she gave to us today, I thought about, I do know one of the people who was killed at Covenant. I had worshiped with her the day before. And it was her faith conviction that led her to come out of her office. It was her faith conviction that led her to attempt to secure a school. So despite her imagination and despite her education, it simply was not enough. And so we have to do more to take care of young people. And so in returning to Nashville as a church planner, but also as a social scientist, I see how those things can work together if we work in a way that respects each other and uses all those gifts to bring to bear to help our society.
Thank you for the question as well. I am Nashvillian. I have to give credence to the fact that I trained here at Meharry, so being here on this campus really means something to me, and thank you all for showing up tonight. To the question itself, how have boats impacted my life? I'll just say that for me, one of my greatest fears as a physician is when my personal and professional life collide. It's a problem. If my parents call me, a sibling calls me, a friend calls me, and they need my help, it's usually not good. For me, professional, personal, I'm a radiologist, so I look at the images and help diagnose illnesses, pathology. What I hate seeing as an emergency radiologist is gunshot wounds. It's senseless in any form. But I really hate seeing those gunshot wounds when they come from a high-powered rifle. Putting that in perspective for me, personal, professional, the Waffle House shooting that occurred here in Nashville, I was on call at Vanderbilt, and I saw how that high-powered rifle devastated a human body. Unfortunately as well, in my home, right outside my home, there was a young gentleman, actually I'll say his name, Jamal Crawford, because he's no longer here, but he was shot in front of my home here in Nashville, and I performed CPR on him for 10 minutes, hoping to keep him alive. Unfortunately, he passed. And then lastly, unfortunately, we have a commonality on this stage. One of the young children killed in the Covenant shooting, my co-fellow, my colleague, and someone who I just hired in my capacity as the executive vice chair at Vanderbilt, her son was killed on the very first day she was supposed to start working with us at Vanderbilt. So when we talk about violence and how it impacts someone that, you say you're a physician, how does it really impact you as it would someone in quote unquote North Nashville? It impacts me just the same, in a different way, but certainly that professional, personal piece hits home, unfortunately.
speaking from kind of a juvenile justice perspective, I will definitely double down and say that, we are at a great point to make more significant impact in our community. I do think we're off to a good start in that juvenile delinquency is way down over the last 10 years or so, over 60% decline in juvenile delinquency as a whole. I will say, though, we know, especially post-pandemic, that although delinquency is down, the seriousness of the offenses that are going on has increased and been more intensified across our community. And we also know that there are a lot of mental health issues that our young people are struggling with. There's a report through the CDC that was done for youth behavior and risk. And there are a lot of troubling things in there that our young people are involved with. And I personally, working in a court system every day, think that we have to pull together as a community and bring back focus on family and community. And where family lacks, the community has to step up and support our young people because it absolutely impacts us all.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me. We've talked a lot about the youth. I'd like to thank the first panel for coming up and talking about us participating. And thank you for letting me to be here and have a seat at the table. I think within my own Fiskai community, I'm just across the block. When we were coming down here, I saw my dorm and I was like, oh, there's my room. Being part of this conversation allows us to address the concerns. And within our Fiskai community, we have concerns. We have concerns for our own safety, not just as a community, but personally. I know for me, I worry. I worry about going outside. I worry about the fact that where I'm at. One of the things I love to do is just hang out with my roommate / best friend. We love to go out and eat and enjoy this beautiful city, to see what the city has to offer. But at the end of the day, we have to think about who we are and where we're going. So I'd like to again extend my thank you, and thank you for having us be part of this conversation.
Hi. So I do police accountability work here in Nashville. It has been a tremendous lift, and it's a heavy one as well. Policing in itself, I'm a former police officer as well. I've found out that they don't like anyone in their business. They like being in their silos. And so having to talk about policing and some of their policies, which I think continue to uphold issues that we as a community have to be aware of, has been one of the things that we're trying to do. It's been really the most impactful thing, and that is creating policy advisory reports, digging into police policy as it pertains to youth. Specifically, we released our annual use of force report, and what we found in that report was that 96% of force that was used against children in the schools was against Black boys, and 56% was used against Black girls, and that was by school resource officers. And so there's this whole talk where school resource officers are not using force in schools, but that's not correct. That's not what the data showed. And so what I'll say to our community is we need your support. We need you to come out. We need you to understand what's happening, as we heard earlier, within our communities. And we produce this information. We have public meetings to talk about what the issues are with our children as it pertains to policing and policing policy. And so I'm very concerned about that. When we saw that report of what was really happening, we know that there's things that are happening outside of the schools. It's environmental, it could be a host of other things. But to see what was actually happening within the school system, it was startling. And so I would just say, continue to follow the Community Oversight Board, continue to understand what's happening, show up. You can follow us everywhere so that we are able to share that information with the public.
Thank you so much. I want to direct the next question to Jennifer and also Jill about, so public safety is a national issue, but here today we're talking about the local conversation. So what sets Nashville apart from other places as they grapple with public safety? And how was the response, and how has the response to some of the recent high-profile incidents that have been mentioned, the Waffle House and Covenant School, how has the response been, and in as well as what's the response to, and what have you noticed about police misconduct, and how is that different here?
Because I deal with police misconduct, we see it firsthand and what it looks like. Over the last 3 years, this is really our 5th year, but we have started, let me start here. The community pushed for oversight after 2 controversial shootings here. And we were doing really excellent work, and then we got preempted by the state. And they took away our investigative power. But what I will say to you is, although they took away our investigative power, they didn't take our power. We were doing very effective work in this community. It was over 50 community groups that formed a coalition. That coalition was amazing. What it did was something that hadn't been done across the country regularly, and that is they were able to get 134,000 people to vote for the CLB. And how they did that was that they organized. You heard earlier about organizing. They got organizers, they went door to door, and they were able to get a community oversight board on the ballot. It was very powerful. I think that the work that we've done over the last 4 years has been amazing. And I think that the state was concerned about what was happening here. And what we were doing was we were talking about policing up front and personal, talking about misconduct up and personal in public meetings, allowing people from the community to have a voice in what was happening. You cannot have policing without the voice of the people. It is up to every person in this community to understand that they have the power to describe what they want when it comes to policing. Policing, as the gentleman said earlier, belongs to the people. And so what you have to do is be empowered to come out and speak publicly about what you want to see in policing in your neighborhoods, in your communities.
Thank you. Jennifer?
And I'll just add, as part of juvenile court, our city's elected officials and city leaders do an amazing job. When we visit other cities, we understand very uniquely that Nashville does have a sweet spot. I've been in rooms where there have been elected officials and department leadership and all of the people that have had to sit down and have some real serious conversations with one another. And everybody has a lane, right? And everybody, is standing on a platform and has an interest. But we all have to figure out how to get all of those interests. Reasonable minds can disagree. But I don't know that there's much disagreement about we want our children and our citizens in Nashville to be safe. And how we go about that, we may think differently about. But our elected officials, our community leaders, our nonprofit organizations are really digging into the issues. I don't know where Miss Virginia went, but I'm her new best friend. Because those numbers that she showed, I lived for years as the truancy magistrate in the Davidson County Juvenile Court. And everything that she had on that slide was the absolute truth. And none of us said a word about it. None of us said a word about it. 4 kids in Murfreesboro went to jail. And there was outrage. And at the same time, over 100 in Davidson County were going to jail from school in zip ties, because they can't even fit handcuffs. That's the reality of the work that's going. And we sat down at a table and we said, shame aside, finger pointing aside, this is a problem that we all have to fix. And in that same time frame, 2017, 2018, we reduced that by having a conversation, by working with our police department to say, let's not arrest under 12-year-olds, 170 something under 12-year-olds in this Davidson County going to jail in zip ties. We were able to reduce that by over 70% in one semester through a conversation.
Thank you. Amazing. I want to direct the next question to Daniel and Christina. We've gleaned from the first panel's presentations that community-driven and cross-sectoral approaches are necessary to build safe, thriving communities. How are you working across systems to achieve change and support Nashville's youth? Christina?
Nashville, Tennessee has one of the most impactful protest legacies in the nation, and I would even say maybe even globally. And so I think there's ways that we can think about how to work cross-sectorally, but also never forgetting the power of what happens when external change agents agitate. And so we need both of those things. We need that cross-sectoral work from academic institutions, faith-based institutions, corporate entities, et cetera, school systems. But we also need external agitators. We need protesters who keep us honest. And so I never want to de-emphasize the power of the protester to keep us honest. And so for those of us who work maybe in higher education, and I've worked as a seminary instructor, we need the voice outside of that space to hold us accountable as well. And so they play a critical role in society, even as we think about what we can do as researchers, as academicians. We also need the encouragement and really the push of protesters as well. So I at least wanted to say the word protest on this panel. And I am really grateful for all that we can bring from a social science and from an academic standpoint. The protesters are what keep this country and this city honest. And we need this particular Generation Z, who is most like our boomer generation, to remind us again of the power of the protest.
Thank you so much for that. So I want to do like a quick history timeline for you all, just to look back at where the police originally was started. So in the 1700s, 1800s, the police in the southern states were formed to take care of slaves working outside the plantation. In the northern states, police were mostly used to keep the slaves coming to the northern states or the immigrants coming to the northern states. So they never were about safety. It was always about controlling Black and brown bodies. So that's the history. And then to draw a quick timeline to how the arts are complicit in this is, so the police was working closely with the prison system because in 1870 in Tennessee, the convict work law started getting passed. So they needed people to do the work that the slaves were doing, and now they needed new people to do the work. So the press, coal, rail, iron, all of these systems worked together to get more people into the convict pipeline so that they could keep the labor going up. They wanted to move from an agricultural country, state to an industrial state. There were no people there. So that's the second thing. So that happened like in 1870. 1986, Core Civics was formed in Nashville as a privatized prison system funded by agencies like Vanderbilt. And then in 2022, there was a bill that was a ballot initiative that was on that said, we want to take slavery off the books. The second sentence of that was, prisoners can be forced to work, basically, right? So they tricked us, right? They said, we're taking slavery off the books, but they tricked. And then this last month, I got an invitation to a very significant arts organization's gala, sponsored by, guess, Core Civics. So the arts are really inherent and in bed with all of these systems. So what I am really interested in is like not working with the systems. Can we break the systems? Can we look at abolition? There are places like Black Nashville Assembly that's working on abolition. Can we look at Black Lives Matter Memphis that's working on abolition? Concerned Citizens for Justice in Chattanooga, No Exceptions, Prisons Collective. So that's really what I'm interested in, and figuring out how we move beyond systems to something that's not working, because the systems are working exactly as they were designed to do. They're doing what they're meant to do. We need to move away from the systems. And if you think about adaptive leadership, everything we're hearing so far is technical solutions. It's not changing the system, right? And the system is doing what it's meant to do. So I feel like cross-sectoral systemic work is a step. And then the next step really has to be systems change. And as important as it is to do the inter-system work, we really have to look at systemic change.
Now that's what I'm talking about. Daniel, the shine on your shoes betrays the activist within. I would like to ask this question to Lavelle and AB. What does peace look like in Nashville? And when you leave here today, what does it look like at your hospital, at your university, your neighborhood, or where you worship? Or is it a fleeting reality at the present time?
I think it's a good question. I think peace actually looks different for everybody in this room. We all come from different communities. And for me, if I honestly think about peace, and someone asked a question earlier, I think it was Paula, she posed, it said, what is safety? Well, we have to actually, to me, recognize that for some people, safety means actually living in a community where there aren't many people that look like me. The community that I live in is one of those communities. And so for me individually, peace is being able to walk down my street without feeling the need to take my work ID with me in case police ask, why are you here? Or being able to ride in my car without having my white coat necessary in my passenger seat in case I get pulled over, because it's the disarming thing I've learned. If you talk about communities that look like mine, I think right now we're excessively policed, but we're actually exorbitantly underfunded as it respects to education. I think there are some pieces on our end that we can look at. I think that looking at getting children into STEM education, I'm being biased here, but looking to do that more than we're looking to have individuals pursue NFL or NBA careers. You think about parents supporting their kids. They're at every basketball game, every junior pro football game. But how often are parents going to spelling bees with the same vigor?
Say it again.
So, but ultimately, I think the question is peace. I think peace is advocacy. It is, believe it or not, peace a lot of times comes after the protests. And so we've got to be willing to stand up like we did here in Nashville with following the Covenant shooting with the Tennessee 3 and people locking arms for 3 miles. Really proud of that. And so for me, marching towards peace, I think it requires a little bit of unrest.
Thank you. Abe? Oh yeah, clap it up. We're going to start going to spelling bees.
Well, I'd like to add, I have to give credit where credit is due. I'd like to thank our alumnus, Justin Jones, for being part of the 3. Seeing him speak, he just this last Friday, we celebrated Jubilee Day. And it's a day where students are celebrated, not faculty or the university, but students. Students who went across the world to raise money for the university. And that money built Jubilee Hall, the iconic Gothic architecture that can be seen on the freeway. So peace for me is the freedom to move anywhere, having a safety net, and to look at an officer without not fear, but with happiness and be able to say, where do I go? Can you help me? That's peace for me. One of the things I love about my university, besides being a FISC guy, is that our security officers know all of us by our name. They don't know us as a student. They know me as AB. They know me as Abraham. One of the security officers loves making the joke of Abraham, Esquire. He loves to make that joke. But he doesn't know is that joke brings so much joy to my day. Just to be accepted, have a community. So peace for me is the freedom to move anywhere with safety.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a final question, and I'm going to direct to Jill and Jennifer again. It's the question that I had asked earlier to the earlier panel about recent patterns of abuse and lack of transparency and accountability by the frontline officers and command staff. What actions do you suggest we take for the community organizations and individuals to deal with this lack of transparency and these egregious misconduct?
First, I would just say, as citizens, really getting behind the efforts that are fighting for our community oversight board. as, you know, just again, an everyday citizen, we don't all understand. I'm a lawyer. Sometimes I don't even understand all of the nuances between metro government suing the state and all of these things. But it is really, really, really important that we lean into these issues. And again, we can think we live in a safer community. We can think we don't have school-age children. Those things don't affect us. But all of this comes, all of us go to the grocery store. All of us walk our dogs at night. And those are the things that really matter. And if we don't fight for the things that are important to us as Nashville, Davidson County, then the state has proven that they're willing to do whatever it takes to make their will be done.
Yeah, accountability and transparency is super important. And we have an entity here in Nashville, the Community Oversight Board, that will assist you with police misconduct complaints in a very safe place, separate from a police department. And I will say that we've been working really hard on really dealing with transparency within our police department. And change in police departments is just takes time. And as the ex-chief of police talked about this earlier, this is your police department. You are the citizens of this city. You pay their salaries. And I keep saying it because I met with so many community members. A lot of them are here. Be empowered to make your complaint. Be empowered to make that call if something, your experience, your encounter isn't the way that you want it to be. You have that right. This agency was put here by the people, for the people. And so what we're trying to do is to continue the work that we've done. Although we've been preempted, the work is still happening. It's not going away. There's been so many things and challenges because when you're doing things effectively, that's when you have to be careful because in this state, and we see that with all kinds of things, how Nashville was kind of taken over by the state. They wanted to, do all these different things with boards and commissions because the work is being done in our city. Jennifer said it really eloquently earlier that we have officials here who care about the people, who put the people first. We're working, we have a brand new mayor, a new agenda, a new administration. We're looking forward to collaborating so that we can have better public safety, transparency, accountability. And what that looks like, probably to all of us, is that we have better systems in place, right? We're dealing with how do we care for our unhoused? What do we do about mental health crises? Is there a co-response? Yes, there is. Did you know about that? Probably not. How are we messaging to the people the services that we do have? And that's a problem. That is a problem that I think every agency in metro government has, that there is some disconnect from the people. They don't understand, as she said, how government works, but you have to also pay attention. Some of this effort lies on you as the community member. And so what I will say to you is that we are working very intentionally to make certain that our police department is becoming more accountable. Every single police misconduct complaint is on a website. Every response from the chief of police is on our website. And so you can go and find out what's happening in your respective precincts. All right, the chief of police, his responses are there, why he didn't take our discipline recommendation. The police department in this city has approved and implemented over 25 of our policy recommendations. I think that needs a round of applause. That is progress. To take antiquated old policies that are vague and ambiguous and to make them very clear and intentional. They weren't reporting soft, empty hand control. We created a policy recommendation report and they accepted it. So now every time a police officer in this city puts his hands on any individual, it is documented, it is counted, and it is counted into their annual numbers. So if their numbers, we got a report a few years ago, they had only used use of force 58 times in a whole year. After that report, it went up to 785 times. So we are making wonderful progress. We are holding our police department as accountable as we can, but we have mayors and, now that we have mayors and administrations and leaders and community leaders and organizations who are requesting and requiring that police departments become more accountable in this city.
Right.
And we see it happening, so.
Thank you so much. I have a question about your, oh yes, give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. Just one quick question, and it's in jest but serious. Does your COB have a Facebook? Because I'm not so good with names, but I might remember that face.
Yes, it does.
And so I can go and say, yeah, it was that guy.
We have a Facebook, it's MNCO Nashville, and it's our same Twitter handle as well as our IG handle.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant.
Oh.
Does the COB have a cop Facebook? So I can choose and pick and choose which one that put his hands on me. Because I might not remember the name, but I will remember the face.
Well, you can check the name out. I told you on the website, it does have like the officers in the
names.
The names.
Okay, give me a Facebook. We need a Facebook.
Yeah,
But that's just a suggestion. That's one to grow on. Okay, keep that for your community. I want you all to please thank this panel. Thank you so much.
First off, I want to say dynamic presentation. I really feel hopeful that we're having these type of conversations. I'm a mother of a murdered son that was slain by the hands of somebody who had a gun 3 years ago. And these conversations that we're having are very encouraging. My theory of change is that if we can bring victims together with those who have done harm, then those can be a way that we can start really figuring out solutions to violence prevention. And so I guess my question here is that one of the main things that victims are offered by the system, by legislators, are tough on crime policies. And however, we know that that is not really serving us, but there's nothing else being offered. I don't know if you know that 60% of the victims in Tennessee are denied victims' compensation. I don't know if you know this, and maybe, Christian, you probably can verify this. Mostly every single juvenile that's in the system was a victim first. And so I guess my question is, as we're talking about policing and we're talking about public safety, where does that piece come in? What do we offer victims that is more tangible, that will offer really substantial change other than excessive policing and over-criminalization? Thank you.
I'd like to say something about that. When we started, and I see one of my ex-board members here, so this was a conversation that we had, because when people came to us after they had been harmed by the police, there was nothing in place for them. They couldn't go to because if your loved one is killed by the police, there's nothing for your family. You don't get any answers from the DA. You don't get any answers from the police. So people come to us and they say, what can happen? Is there anything for us? Because we are victims as well. And so there wasn't a whole lot that we could do. But what we did was we fought for, in the budget, and I see Jamel there, in the budget related to, we need a social worker on our side. Because although your spouse or your son has been killed by the police, you still have to deal with the aftermath of it. The residual trauma is real. And so the only thing that we could do at this point was to ask for a social worker to make certain that wraparound services were being offered to what I consider victims of police violence. And there wasn't a whole lot out there. It still isn't. And so I feel her question so deeply, because the first step, I think, for us was to get some social workers or some professionals on staff in order to address those types of harms.
Right. Daniel?
So I grew up in India, and I'm trying to think through how we can there are a lot of people who hold on to ancestral practices, right? Like we had the land acknowledgement. Rather than just doing that and then moving on, like what are the ancestral practices we can bring back. So in India, we have a panchayat system in the little villages. So village elders will bring together families of perpetrators and victims and say, this is the harm that's happened to you. This is the harm this person has created. How will we address it? Without going to the police, no prisons, right? Like, it's really small towns. And so there's a dialogue that happens, and there's accountability for the victim. The harm is addressed, but it's not to punish, right? It's to heal, it's to restore, restorative practices, right? So I feel like that's what's missing, and unless we go back, or unless we like think of ancestral practices like that were here before the police was created, in the system that it was created to manipulate Black and brown bodies, we're going to not ever solve the problem. So we need to go back, or we need to revisit what our ancestors were doing, and we need to bring that back to our lives now.
Yeah.
And if I could just add, kind of piggybacking off of that, juvenile court does engage in restorative justice practices. We have a program by which we divert young people from the system, entirely from the system. We do not process their information. We divert them back to the community for low-level offenses. If there's no risk to the community, we do that. We also, with a myriad of higher-level offenses, engage in restorative practices. Our local district attorney, Glenn Funk, believes in restorative justice. And so for families needing to sit down, victims of crimes, we have an awesome nonprofit organization, Voices for Victims, that can help you walk through that process. We also have a victim witness service coordinator at juvenile court. So if the offender is a young person in our community, that is a process that we can walk you through at juvenile court as well.
And I would echo the points about both global acts of restorative justice in some ways and bringing people together. But I just wanted to say out loud to the woman who just shared that narrative, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry for the loss of the life of your precious son. And a part of that restorative justice is recognizing that a community is impacted over the loss of one life. And while we're not in the place of that mother, we all should all lament that a precious young person is no longer here. Restorative justice asks the question not only between the injured party in the most direct sense of it, but also communally. It asks, what are the harms and how can we repair these harms together? And there are harms over the loss of the life of one child, one adult son, that not only impact that child's mother and their child's family and the hopes of what they could be, but it ripples through a community and through a country. And we're a nation that is in grief because we have not communally lamented what it means to have lost our sons. And a part of restorative justice cannot just stop with two individuals. It has to be a communal restorative justice about what does it mean for us as a people to be missing our sons, to be missing our daughters, and to grieve that together.
Yeah, Christina, I would say it's perpetual grief, and it's not just for one act, it's generational, right? And no amount of money is going to bring back the individual or shed the grief. But what I would mention is that if the communities could get together and educate themselves on the state's statutes of immunity for police, the reason why you're enabled to seek remedy, financial remedy for this egregious misconduct, this murder, the loss of your son, is because the state and the government, the federal government, have this statute of immunity for police. It qualifies them to be immune from responsibility or accountability. You cannot sue them if a judge gets the case. He'll throw it out because the highest court in the land says that doesn't matter, and so. Both there's a federal statute of qualified immunity, and then every state generally has their own. And we've seen in a few states over the past few years since the murder of George Floyd, that people can get together, petition their lawmakers, overturn that statute of immunity, so that police are accountable, and you can sue, and you can get some remedy, and that police officer can be sued, right?
Can I make a little bit of an adjustment
Yeah.
to that? In fact, if you go to our website at AmericanPolicingReform.org, you can download our white paper on police qualified immunity. In fact, it is not a codified statute, which which makes it problematic, which means that in each of the 12 districts of the federal court, they interpret it very differently. And we have looked at every interpretation of qualified immunity for police officers in the last 10 years. And I can tell you, it's rather scary. So download the white paper from our website and go to your state legislators and go to the federal government to appeal for the actual codification of the laws around police qualified immunity, because it is only a federal recommendation. It is not actually codified law.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that clarification. And one more question here.
Yeah, David Eichert. I'm a professor at Vanderbilt and also an artist. And I was thinking about a question or concern that both Daniel and Christina made, and we're trying to connect the dots and thinking kind of beyond institutional engagement and reform. Because I think, Christina talked about the importance of protest, right? And Daniel had talked about the importance of kind of restructuring how we think about institutions and our reliance on those institutions and how we can rethink what we actually need. And I'm thinking about what recently happened in Mississippi, where they literally had a police force within the police force that literally decided that this white woman who was living with these two black men was inappropriate for this racial space, until they literally went to that house, harassed those men, literally shot one through the mouth, sodomized them. And then when they realized that they had gone too far in terms of the violence, the one guy had been shot through the throat and was bleeding out, they went out in the lawn, got their story straight, planted drugs, and tried to concoct a whole story in which these guys were actually the problem and even filed charges against them. It was only later on, after these men had filed reports and there had been a deep investigation, federal government got involved, that it was discovered that they had a whole secret force of, I think they called themselves the Mod Squad or something, where they literally went around and they had been doing this for a number of years. And so my question is, given the fact that particularly for Black folks, the police have no integrity, right? For me, when I see police officers, I am terrified. I have a PhD, I'm a tenured professor. I don't have any type of police record at all, right? When I see a police officer pull me over, when I see those blue lights, I am terrified. And I think a lot of Black folks share in that, the sense that policing forces and these institutions have no credibility. So the question that I want to put to the panel is, what do we do? How can we think about moving forward in a system and trying to acquire justice, not just thinking within this kind of reformist mindset where we're working within the confines and the strictures of these systems, which I think in some ways are designed to have us petition, designed to have us tweak little things, right? But maintain the power structure. So is there a way to not just think about reform in this traditional way, but to think about what a new system of policing actually looks like, and how to embody that, right?
It's very difficult, very complicated question, and I'll leave it to the panelists. I think what it looks like is jobs. I think it looks like jobs and education. And then with that, hopefully, much less need for a police force.
So there are a lot of reports out on what you can do other than policing. So Pittsburgh, Allegheny County has a report. They did a major report. Minneapolis did a report. And all of them are not saying what can you do better with the police. They're saying, how do we find other systems? How do we fund healthcare? How do we fund support for people who might be under the influence of drugs, or how do we find support for people experiencing violence? Support, access and resources, not. And so I think the change here has to happen at the budget level, right? Like we heard from other panelists, get involved. It's not the government, you are the government. You are the government, right? Like get involved. And I know it's a burden, and it's a burden especially for people of color who have to work and then come home, take care of the families, and then show up at the council meetings. But you are the government. You hold the power, right? So you have to be involved. You can tell your council person where the budget has to go. You can tell the mayor where the budget has to go. And that's where the change has to go. Can we send more budget to the restorative practice? Can we send more budget to the community oversight board? And then that's where the answers begin to come out, right? And then that's still working within the system. We do need to figure out how do we get out of the system. And the system is capitalist. It's based on extracting from someone who doesn't have the power. So there, the only thing you can change is like, how do we take power away from one person and distribute the power out to many? And how do we move away from an extractive practice to a nurturing practice? It's a big ask. We don't even have departments that teach comparative economies. I went to Georgetown for an MBA. When I asked my professor, is there a comparative economics course? They laughed at me because they said, why would we want to learn anything other than capitalism? Where are we now with capitalism, right? So can we look at comparative economics and see what might a democratic socialist system approve, what might a Marxist system approve? Community member and not as in my official role. Let me put that disclaimer out there. I'm not speaking in my official role. I'm speaking here as a community member. And so those are the kind of questions as professors at universities you need to be planting with your economics professors and saying, can you create a comparative economics course? So we look at that. And if we don't solve that meta level problem, we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Thank you for the question. It was really great. And I'm really glad you brought up the thought of comparative, because last year I was in a comparative criminal justice class where we studied criminal justice systems from all around the world, from the People's Republic to China to as close as France. And we learned about these different systems. And so my answer to the question is, why not both? Why can't we create a new system that incorporates some of the old, but has a new spirit, that has a new ideal about looking into what are we actually perpetuating? Is it safety, or are we just overly policing? And so I'm very glad that FISC has these classes and really trying to push forward with new ideas of thinking. And so again, my answer is, why not both?
So we have thank you, AB. We have a couple of questions over here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a student from Fisk University. And my question is about certain policies that are being implemented as it relates to the education system in Nashville. Like, what are the current initiatives as it relates to the children? Because in the first panel, they talked about the over-policing of particularly African-American students. And I know this also happens to Hispanic students as well. So what type of initiatives are going to be implemented so that these children don't get put in the justice system at such a young age?
Yeah, thank you for that question as well. So it's an evolution, much like some elected officials, school leadership changes. And one thing about Nashville that I've learned is that school leadership matters. And the culture of that school rises and falls on the person in charge, period. And there is nobody that's gonna rock that boat. Not even a little black girl magistrate with a pen. Nobody rocks that boat. And one of the things that I would love to see is more transparency around those things so that we can go back to the table and fix those things. I used to be part of a group called Passage, Positive and Safe Schools Advancing Greater Equity, which was a multidisciplinary group of community members and different officials that were tackling those issues. And that group somehow kind of disbanded. And so currently, again, school is one of those things. I'm a mother of a Black son, and I grapple. There's not one day that goes by that I don't question whether I'm making the right educational decision for my 7-year-old. And God forbid when he turns 15.
Right.
And he's 6 feet tall like his daddy. because then he's going to be seen as a threat. And so that is an area I think we have to lean into. And I think we have to figure out a spirit to lean into these and many other issues. I rejoice when I hear people push things like restorative practice, particularly in this room. But I just ask you, please, sir, please, ma'am, keep that same energy on the Facebook because there it's a finger pointing. Why are these kids back on the street? Why is this happening? Why is nobody holding them accountable? Words like restorative justice is not a bypass, a get out of jail free card. It is the conduit by which we create better young people, old people, citizens. And so some of it is that we don't necessarily always have the stomach for hard things.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to grow our muscle.
We want the quick fix, but the long-term sustainable fix is restorative justice.
And from the outside looking in, maybe it seems like restorative justice is not locking them up, it's not confining them. Those things haven't worked.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to try something new. Thank you for that.
If I touch on this, great. I'm going to touch on this from a Nashville perspective, legit. And that is, when you talk about education, there's private schools and there's public schools in Nashville, right? And the private schools, I attended one, not because my parents necessarily were the richest and had money. I played sports. I knew why I was there. But I decided I'm going to use them if they're going to use me. But that's not necessarily the opportunity that everyone has. The private schools that were established in Nashville were done all around the years 1966 to 1971. Why is that? Desegregation, right? So what they did was, all right, we'll all go to school together, but we're going to go to these other schools where you have to pay a little bit more money. And I don't think we've ever truly solved that problem. And it's an issue. The other thing I'll tell you in Nashville is that you also have private school by zip code. Unfortunately, I struggle because I'm participating in that. My daughter is 6. She goes to Julia Green, which is a school everybody wants their kid to go to. My daughter is one of, I think, 5 Black kids in the entire school. Now, it's amazing. The education that they get there. They actually have school picnics and fairs. It's insane. And in fact, it rivals Brentwood Academy, where I went to a private school, but it's a private school by zip code. And there are kids that look like me when I was that age that don't get to participate. How do you change that? How do you fix it? One thing, I'll be honest, I was actually talking with Marcus Bradshaw, who's a fellow physician that's in the crowd here earlier today. And I said, we've got to do something about this. Because we can't just sit, I'll be honest, can't just sit on a panel and talk about it. You've got to take ownership and accountability for it. And so for me, one thing that we talked about today doing is setting up a mentorship pipeline for people that want to go into medicine. They got inroads if you want to be an engineer, but if you're an African-American kid right now, you want to go to medicine, what do you do? So the same way they have big brother, little brother, big sister, little sister, we're going to set up something called Big Doc, Little Doc. We're going to do it, Marcus. And what that's going to be is a longitudinal pipeline for individuals that are attendings like myself. We can help fellows, who can help residents, who can help med students, who can help college students. We got to start somewhere, but you've got to change it. Because if you wait too late when people are residents and you ask, well, why can't we find any African-American residents that want to go into radiology? Well, we're all fighting over the same people. It's a small pool. So we've got to start earlier, got to start in primary education. And that's what I'm going to look to do. But I certainly think if you're talking Nashville and education, you've got to address the private school, public school differential.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Very insightful. We'll take one last question here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to be real quick because I know it's late and it's homecoming for TSU, so happy homecoming. First, my name is Jamel Campbell-Gucci. My question is for Daniel and Jill, and I need to talk a little bit before I get there, but I promise you I'll make it short. I'm from this zip code. A couple things that we're known for is we're not only known for hot chicken and having the greatest HBCUs in the country, but also having the highest incarceration rate, and also being dead-ended by a city council decision in 1962. in a response to the organizing that was taking place with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and folks like that. Oftentimes we talk about violence in a very limited fashion, but we know that if we follow the money, we can very much see where the violence is. If we take a step back in our local budget, we know from 1977 to today, we've invested over $10 billion in policing and caging in Black communities, but only $5 billion in housing and only $1 billion in public health. We also know that even in this last year budget, while we had a $125 million surplus for everyday folks in here, that means that we should have sidewalks everywhere. Streets should be good, and everything that we need on a community level should be well taken care of. We know that while we had a surplus, that the police budget expanded to $281 million, while affordable housing was only spent $25 million. So that means that per person in Nashville, we invested $381 in police while only investing around about $15 in public housing. Now, when we look at that, we see the issues that are happening in our community, and we see a wider range of what's happening and putting the context around violence that our community members are experiencing. So Jill and Daniel, if you will talk about your budget allocations and how you are limited in scope by the amount of money that you are invested in. And just for transparency, I was one of the first people put on a community oversight board, and currently I serve as a community organizer with the Black Nashville Assembly. And before they answer that question, I just want to challenge everyone in this room to join an organization, because if we want the system to transform, not reform, we need to topple it and break it, right? If we never see a dog eat its tail, and so we will never see a system that benefits off of our oppression transform. It will only reform and tinker. But with that being said, Daniel and Jill, will you all talk about you all's budgets and how we can advocate for a greater investment and what a greater investment will do for your ability to provide safety for the people of Nashville?
Thank you for that. That's a really great question. So when the organizers, when they wrote out what Amendment 1 for the Community Oversight Board should look like, it included a $1.5 billion, a $1.5 million budget that was included in the legislation. That never happened before. So we were guaranteed a $1.5 million every year. We were able to determine that that wasn't enough to do the work with just 10 people for the work that we had to do in Nashville. And so what happened was we sat down with our board members, looked over all the information that we had, how we collected all the information through data on what was happening within Metro Police, and what their budgets looked like compared to what we were receiving. We were very short. All we asked for was 1 penny per dollar that they got so that we could do this work. So for instance, if there's 1,300 officers and there's only 3 investigators to do misconduct, then we're upside down. And so what we needed was to have a budget that resembled, like, if you're going to continue to hire officers, then we need to continue to have investigators so that we can investigate these complaints of misconduct. And so we were able to get our budget up. So we went from 3 investigators to 5. We went from 1.5 to 2.1. We were able to get, at that particular time, with Jamil and the rest of the board members' help, we were able to get an additional like $580,000. That's revolutionary in this city, because we're talking about policing. But the more money you get, the more every year that we have been set up as a community oversight board, empowering people to come out and talk about policing, to be invested in policing in this city. And like I said earlier, it is up to you on how you want to be policed in this city. The state would come in and every year say, we're taking away this, you got to have this, you aren't doing this. Until they were able to come and really decimate our budget. Now our budget is at the mercy of the mayor. The mayor now has all the power of the oversight board. That is a challenge, because if they don't want to budget us, then we no longer exist. So that's what happened to the Community Oversight Board. We once had a budget by the people set up in our legislation, guaranteed 1.5 every year. Now it is at the mercy of our city mayor and council. And so I would say to you all, be invested in finding out what's happening. Be invested and informed about what budgets look like, because the budget affects how you are policed.
And perhaps try to get it codified in state law so that all the municipalities have to abide, if that's even a possibility. Daniel?
Thanks. So for us, our budget has stayed flat for 23 years in Metro Arts. And before I, point fingers at previous elected officials, I want to say that in the 23 years, 88% of our funding went to large organizations. 88% of the funding we funded for the last, from 1988 to now. So we've funded organizations predominantly with a budget of over 500,000. And you can guess who has those organizations, right? Organizations with a budget of over 500,000. And it ended up being, we funded basically 6 or 7 organizations for the predominant those years. So we were complicit in the problem that I'm trying to fix now. So we were complicit, I take responsibility. But there are, the Department of Labor says there are about 15,000 artists in Nashville, 15,000 in Nashville alone. And this does not count independent artists. It only counts artists who are affiliated with an organization and they report out to the IRS. So I would guess there are about 20,000 to 25,000 artists in Nashville at a low conservative estimate. There are 330 arts nonprofits registered in Nashville. For all of them, I got a budget of $4.7 million last year, which was an increase of $2 million. And that $2 million came because of artist advocacy to redirect the $2 million from earmarks to the Metro Arts, right? They were just going to go to the 6 organizations that had been getting funding for all these years. So all that to say that the artists have put out a proposal to the mayors during the mayoral forum that they said they want 1% of the combined city and school budget. So that's $3.3 billion. 1% of that would be about $33 million. And I think that's right-sizing a budget for a city that's built its brand as Music City, Athens of the South, the It City. And we know we got the name Music City from Jubilee Singers, right? Not because of anything else. So that's where the artists have made that ask. And so it's up to you all to hold the incoming officials accountable. You can put out a scorecard and say, you said this during your mayoral forum or your council campaign. It's 6 months into the year, budget season starting. Where are we now? So that's where our budget is right now.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Well, please give a round of applause for the panel.
Give it up for the panel. Thank you all so much for sticking around. We think that those questions were really, really important. And I think they advanced us in a lot of ways. Give it up for the panelists once again. Give it up for our amazing moderator, Aloe Blacc. Thank you for being here, taking your time. And we have just some amazing people in the audience besides Nashville people and people traveling from everywhere. I mean, Ben Folds is in the audience. I mean, this is just amazing people coming out to see what's going on here. Give it up for Greg, who's going to take that and just make it colorful and make it look amazing, which is what everybody's been saying. So he's been over here doing his work the entire time. And then as we talk about artists, as you all know, when you came in, there were some artists who had their art right outside. When you leave, make sure you go over and talk to them. Not only do we have local artists, but artists even came all the way from Chicago. Dr. Robert Vargas, who's a professor at University of Chicago, came all the way down here just to be part of this and showcase his art. Even
You can buy the art too. It's not just for looking.
That's right. Yeah, you can also buy the art. And I should say this too, because we had a conversation with the artist. We invested in the artist. We paid them to show their art here. And the conversations I was having with them, they said people always ask us to show up and just kind of acquire our labor. That's not what ARR does. We invest in the local community, and that's just one example of that. Take a picture of this QR code, fill out the survey, tell us what you think about tonight, tell us what we should be doing moving forward. And finally, I want to thank my ARR colleagues who are here, who have done great work. I want to thank the event team, the marketing team, the comms team, the videography team, and particularly the planning team. Karina Jenkins, Ariel Frills, Lisa Habersack, and Just Paul Bhatia for organizing this entire event. Great job. And so Nashville, thank you for attending the AIR Equity Initiative's first annual Working at the Intersection Symposium. Let's keep using evidence to create a more equitable world. Thank you for coming out tonight. If you were part of the panel, if you were on a panel or you spoke at any point, come up, take a quick picture, go out and look at the art. Everyone be safe going home, and let's continue to create pathways to peace.